Welcome to this session, Dyslexia Initiatives in Topeka Public Schools, Session 6 for elementary staff. I'm Robin Dixon, Pre-K through 5th grade ELA Social Studies Consulting Teacher, and I will be your presenter for this session. Let's begin by looking at our success criteria and learning intentions for this session. Our learning intentions is as follows. Today we are learning the last three components of structured literacy. These are morphology, syntax, and semantics. We will know we are successful when we can list and define the last three components of structured literacy and determine how to implement elements of morphology, syntax, and semantics with students. Let's begin by reviewing prior information that has been learned in earlier sessions. We'll start by looking and reviewing the definition of dyslexia as stated by the International Dyslexia Association. The Kansas definition of dyslexia states that dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and provisions of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Let's review what dyslexia is not. Dyslexia is not a vision or hearing issue. It is not seeing letters or words backwards. Dyslexia is not attributed to limited intelligence. In fact, students who are dyslexic are highly intelligent. It is also not due to low motivation or limited effort. Again, students who show characteristics dyslexia are extremely motivated to learn to read. Dyslexia is not due to poor teaching. Dyslexia is not rare. In actuality, 1 in 5 students come to the classroom with some characteristics of dyslexia. And finally, it is not a condition that can be outgrown. Before we continue on to the last three elements of structured literacy, take a moment to pause the video and think about Session 5 and reflect on what you know about structured literacy. In that presentation, we looked at the first three elements of structured literacy. And now take a moment to write down what you know and what comes to mind concerning these three words: morphology, syntax, semantics. These are the next three elements of structured literacy that you will learn more about in this session. As you paused the video and reflected, you may have thought that remembered that semantics, syntax, and morphology are the last three elements of structured literacy. And on the screen, we will review those 6 elements, and we'll also look at the principles that guide structured literacy. You saw this in Session 5 as well. So on the left-hand side, you will see the 6 elements of structured literacy. In our last session, we focused on phonology, sound symbol, and syllables. In this session, we'll focus on semantics, syntax, and morphology. And on the right-hand side, you will see the principles that guide structured literacy. Instruction in structured literacy needs to be systematic and cumulative. It needs to be explicit, as well as diagnostic. And this applies to all 6 elements of structured literacy, the 3 that you learned about in Session 5, and the 3 that we will learn about in Session 6. Let's also look at 3 terms that will be important as we focus on these last 3 elements of structured literacy. The first one is morphology. And morphology is the study of meaning, and a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in language. Syntax is the set of principles that dictate the sequence and function of words in a sentence, and this includes grammar, sentence structure, and the mechanics of language. Semantics is concerned with meaning. So we will now look at each one of these in detail. The first element of structured literacy that we'll look at today is morphology. And again, in our previous slide, we talked about the term of a morpheme. And a morpheme is simply the smallest unit of meaning within a word. And students with strong morphological skills possess a distinct advantage over students who use a whole word approach to decode words. With strong morphological skills, students can approach a novel, multisyllabic word and break it into parts in order to predict the meaning. This skill will help in all areas of literacy: decoding, spelling, comprehension, and oral language. Many times, struggling readers are unable to identify a word they encounter in the text, even though they know it in their oral language. As a result, their expressive vocabulary remains quite limited compared with proficient readers who incorporate novel vocabulary from their reading into their oral language. Strong readers accomplish this because they recognize the word, infer its meaning, and are able to pronounce it. They efficiently map the vocabulary from their reading with previously known oral vocabulary as well. When we look at morphology, we are looking at the smallest unit of meaning within a word. And morphology is comprised of prefixes, suffixes, and roots. And on the screen, you will see a link to a bit.ly that you will be able to access anytime through this presentation. And we're going to take a moment to look at the activity that is on this bit.ly and how you can use it with your students. When you access the larger article, within that article you'll see the embedded activity of a word matrix. And in a word matrix, what you're simply doing is you're taking prefixes, base words, root words, and suffixes in order to combine and make new words. You'll see that is called a word sum. And what this shows us is all the sums of smaller parts of morphology, of morphemes that have been put together to make new words with new meanings. And down at the bottom, you'll see that they have the word unhelpfulness. They've taken the prefix of un, they've combined it with the base word of help, and they've also taken the suffixes of full and ness to create a longer word. So what students can do is make a list of words that they are making combining all these parts. So for example, you could also do unhelpful. You could do helps, helping, helped, helper, or helpers. So you can create words combining all of these parts. This is a great activity to help students understand how word parts, how morphemes are put together. And you can also talk about how changing the morphemes within that word changes its meaning and vocabulary, parts of speech, etc. Let's take a moment to look at the screen and to study the suggested teaching order when we're looking at how to teach morphology to our students. And before we do that, I want to go over 3 terms that will be essential as we're talking about morphology. The first is a base word. A base word is a standalone word that needs no other parts to combine to make a word. For example, sugar is a standalone word. Dog is a standalone word. A root is the basis for a new word, but not typically a standalone word. For example, cred is a root word which means to believe. Cred is not a standalone word, but can be combined with prefixes and suffixes to form new words such as credulous, incredible, for example. And finally, the term affix. Affixes simply refer to prefixes and suffixes together. When we separate them, they are called a prefix and a suffix. So let's begin by looking at Anglo-Saxon words. When we look at Anglo-Saxon words, these are standalone words, and you'll see the words dog, cat, and chair listed. They do not need other parts to form a complete word. And these are words that have developed over time and go back to the Anglo-Saxon development of language. And today, there are still 4,500 words that survive today that are Anglo-Saxon in origin. The second type of words that you want to teach are Latin. And these are words that contain a Latin root and either a prefix, a suffix, or both. And it's important to note that 40 to 60% of words that are defined and used have some type of a Latin root in that word. So Latin roots are also the most common polysyllabic types of words that students will encounter both at the elementary and secondary levels. So let's see how this might look. So for example, let's take the word audition. Audition is formed from the Latin root aud, A-U-D, which means to hear, and this the suffix of shun, and shun means full of. So we can combine those two parts to make the word audition. Let's look at the word prescribe. Prescribe is made of the root scribe and the prefix pre. So it's how these words that are combined and how these word parts are joined together that form new words with new meanings. And finally, we have Greek words. And these form 10% of the words that we encounter, and they also tend to be a combination of root words. For example, in the word autograph, autograph is formed from the two root words auto, meaning self, and graph, meaning to write. The word geology is formed from the roots of geo and ology, and combined to make the word geology. And Greek words are especially important in domain-specific areas such as math and science. So as you're teaching your students, it's important to teach them Latin and Greek roots and prefixes and suffixes. So that should be a part of your instruction that you are giving to your students. When we're teaching morphology, we need to teach the morpheme's role in the word. For example, how does that role of a prefix or suffix for example, impact what that word means? If we're adding a suffix, L-E-S-S, for example, and back to our word sugar, adding L-E-S-S completely changes the meaning of the word sugar, from having sugar to saying that something that's sugarless to not having sugar. So we have to teach how those morphemes work in words. We also need to teach the types of morphemes. The first that you will see is a bound morpheme. And bound morphemes must be combined with other words to form a complete word. They typically appear as affixes in the English language. And again, the affixes would be prefixes and suffixes. We also have something called free morphemes. And free morphemes are considered base words because these can be standalone words as well. So standalone words are called free bases. And most free morphemes can be combined with affixes to form a complex word. So for example, if we take the word irregardless, regard is our base word. It can be a standalone morpheme. And we can add ear to the beginning and less to the end and make the word irregardless. Each one of those three morphemes absolutely impacts the meaning, definition, and usage of that word. Let's take a moment to look at specific activities that you could incorporate into your classroom to develop students' morphological knowledge and awareness. The first is called Find the Root. And in this activity, you are going to teach the concept of root words to your students. You might say a root word is the main part of the word in a longer word, because think about that longer word has had prefixes and suffixes and other roots added to it. So you can give your students a list of words and ask them to highlight the root words. On the screen you will see 4 words: hopeful, sleepless, childish, and unhelpful. Think about what you would highlight for the root word. In the word hopeful, the word hope would be highlighted, as that is the base word that has been had the suffix full added to make the new word hopeful. In sleepless, our base word is sleep, and it has had the suffix of less added. In childish, the main word is a base word child, and it has had the suffix ish added to it. In the word unhelpful, our main word is help, and this word has had a prefix un and a suffix full added to the word to create the new word unhelpful. Another activity that you can complete with your students is called Fix the Affixes. And in this activity, you're going to explicitly teach the definition of an affix, that these are extra parts that are fixed on to the root word. And the affix is at the beginning of a word is called a prefix because pre means before and a suffix comes at the end of the word. So that needs to be explicitly taught to students so they know the definition and delineation between a prefix and a suffix. So in this activity, ask your students to fix the broken roots with the concept of the correct affix. So on the left-hand side in red, you will see 4 words: do, walk, sad, great. And in blue, you will see the 4 suffixes: ly, full, able, and ing. Have your students combine those words. Perhaps they're on word cards, and they are going to actually take those cards and manipulate and move do to the suffix, to the correct suffix, and full to the correct base word. With older students, this might be done on paper, or you could also use word cards with older students. So think about how this would best be applied to the grade level that you teach. So if we combine those words together, those those suffixes and base words, how would you combine those? Did you get the words doable, walking, sadly, and grateful? Another activity to complete with your students is a word sort. And in this activity, you're going to ask students to sort the following words according to their affixes. And again, an affix is a prefix and a suffix. Then they should guess the meaning of the affix based on their prior knowledge and the patterns they see. So looking at this list of 6 words, how would you pair these together based on common affixes? Did you combine forgetful and careful? These words share the suffix of full. So if I'm forgetful or if I'm careful, what am I? I'm full of forgetting or full of care. Look at the next 2 words that we could put together: disappear and disown. These share the common prefix of dis. So we have the words disappear and disown. What does dis mean? Dis means not. So to disappear is to not appear, and to disown is to no longer own. Now, as your students progress in grade level, you might notice that the sophistication of the affixes that you use become more difficult or perhaps more connected to domain-specific words in science and social studies. For example, we can combine the words shipment and government. Government is a domain-specific word that students would see in social studies. So based on ship and shipment and government, we know that the common suffix is meant. So what do shipment and government mean with that shared suffix? And this activity can work extremely well in science and in math with those words that have common science and roots and prefixes for Greek and Latin. For example, ology, the study of, geology, and zoology, for example. So let's take just a moment to look at a few other activities that you can try with your students to help develop their morphological awareness. And the first is word sorts with self-discovery to aid in recognition of word families based on morphology or orthography. So for example, just a moment ago we looked at ology, we looked at zoology, geology. We can look at other words that have ology, and students can take all of those words and realize that ology means the study of. So if I know that geology is the study of the earth, then I can know that Egyptology is the study of Egypt. We can also provide explicit instruction of syllable types to recognize orthographical patterns, and this helps not only with developing orthography or morphology, but also with decoding words as well. So if we've given explicit instruction, for example, in the consonant LE pattern, we know that those are always found at the end of a word, so students will begin to recognize that ZLE, BLE, FLE are found at the end of the words, and they'll realize that that is a pattern that occurs with that syllable type. And finally, we can teach word manipulation through blending and segmenting morphemes to further solidify patterns. This can occur through flashcards, syllabication, word analysis while reading, letter tiles, and so on. When I think of word analysis, I think this is a great place for students to apply their knowledge of prefixes, suffixes, and root words. For example, if students know that pre means before, they can know what pre-bake means, pre-cook, preamble, for example. And students can also recognize if they see a word with AUD. If they know that AUD is to listen, they can see the word audience. They can see the word audiologist and realize that those words all have something to do with listening or hearing. Also manipulating letter tiles or tiles with prefixes and suffixes and taking those tiles to combine and create new words. So as we've gone through this section on morphology, take a moment to pause and think about what you've learned about morphology. What was new learning? What did you perhaps already know? And how will it look to apply principles of morphology to your classroom? And this may vary by the grade level that you teach and the level of morphology instruction that you provide your students. So take a moment to pause the video, and after you've had time to reflect on your thinking, you may share with a partner or a colleague or colleagues if you are watching this with others, or if you are watching this alone, take a moment to write down your thinking and proceed on to the next part of the presentation by pushing play when you are ready. The next element of structured literacy that we will explore is syntax. Syntax is the set of principles that dictate the sequence and function of words in a sentence. This includes grammar, sentence structure, and the mechanics of language. We can also think of it as a set of rules for an analysis of the syntax of language. Syntax is important because it also aids in comprehension, which is simply the connection between orthography and semantics. This is what allows us to say, Ray hit the ball, instead of hit Ray the ball. Native speakers of a language learn correct syntax without even realizing it. Think about if you ever heard a toddler speak. When a toddler is learning to combine words into sentences, they will refer to him or herself as me, or refer to themselves by name. They automatically make the switch from me want the ball or Brady want the ball to I want the ball. It becomes automatic and instinctual. On the screen, you will see another definition of syntax. And this says, syntax is the study of the rules, principles, and processes that govern the structure of sentences, specifically word order. It refers to sentence structure and the variation of phrases and clauses which the author manipulates for a variety of reasons. And these include fitting a specific occasion or situation, reading a specific audience, and achieving a specific purpose. On the previous slide, we alluded to students learning specifically how to understand that sentence structure is important to communicating a message. So we can simply think of syntax also as the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences. And it's important to note that this applies to both oral and written communication. Our syntax for a class lesson is different than the syntax used when talking with friends, for example. When we are presenting information to a class, our situation is formal, whereas if we're conversing with friends, that is an informal situation. Our audiences vary. When we're teaching, we are reaching our audience of our students, which is a more formal audience. When we're with friends, it's an informal audience, so the way that we communicate, the language and phrases that we use may vary. And in those two scenarios, our purposes are very different. While in a classroom we are communicating learning and we want students to clearly know the message of what we're teaching them, when we're communicating with friends, we're simply catching up, and this situation and the purpose is not as formal. Just like this applies to us as adults, it also applies to our students as well. So students need to be taught to vary their syntax based on these three elements. Think about when students are writing, the difference between when students are writing a text to a friend or writing an assignment for class. When we look at syntax, there are several elements that we need to keep in mind and that need to be taught to our students so that they are using correct syntax. The first of which is all sentences must have a subject or predicate. And a predicate simply means a verb. It's important that we teach sentence patterns to our students. They need to know how to craft a well-written and spoken sentence. And this could include teaching common sentence patterns, such as the most common sentence pattern, which is the noun, verb, direct object, sentence style. It also includes teaching them adverbs and adjectives. So we need to be able to teach how and where adjectives and adverbs are placed in sentences. For example, we know that adjectives modify nouns. We typically see adjectives before a noun. We would say the blue ball. Whereas with adverbs, adverbs can come before or after the noun. We can say the boy ran quickly to the store. Or we could say the boy quickly ran to the store. So placement of adjectives and adverbs are extremely important. Students also need to be taught that adverbs can also modify nouns and other adjectives, for example. We need to teach student types of sentences. At the lower grades, this includes declarative, interrogative, and explanatory sentences. As students progress in their syntax, we need to teach them the difference between complex and compound sentences and how to combine those together, how to use an introductory phrase in a sentence, and so on. So as students progress through school and the elementary grades, we must teach them how to form those basic sentences, build on those to create more complex types of sentences. It's also critical that we teach punctuation. And punctuation can just be referred to as a set of marks used to separate sentences or clauses and to clarify meaning. If we did not have punctuation, it would be extremely difficult to understand the written message of an author. Think about when students turn in an assignment and there is no punctuation, how difficult it is for you to read that writing and to understand the message the student is trying to communicate. Think of it this way. We can take the phrase, "Let's eat, Grandma," or we can place a comma in the middle and we can say, "Let's eat, Grandma." So you can see that adding that comma very much changes the meaning of the sentence. Another example, we can say, the politician said the voter is a fool, or the politician said the voter is a fool. Notice that those placement of the commas very much changes the meaning of our sentences and the message that we are conveying. We also have to teach that words can be used as multiple parts of speech. For example, run can be a noun or a verb, and it can also be a multiple meaning word. We can use run as a noun and say, I'm going for a run after work. Or we can use it as a verb and say, I am going to run to the park. We've changed from a noun to a verb. And run has many meanings. In fact, it can have over 600 variations of shades of meaning. So we have to teach students that words can be used in multiple ways. To go back to our example of run, we can also add these sentences. The fabric runs the length of the table. Or the wet paint is running down the wall. So teaching students those variations in word meaning and parts of speech is extremely important, as using the type of word impacts the meaning of how that word is used and the meaning of that sentence. It's also important to note that with punctuation, multiple meanings, we need to think of homonyms and how those come into play, and how those convey the meaning and avoid confusion. For example, if we take the contraction there, THEY', that's a very different meaning than saying THEIR, for example. So we need to teach students how homonyms affect meaning and understanding. So here's a simple activity to try with your students. Think about the following sentence. On the screen it says, the dog ate a, and we have the letter B. You're probably focusing on the word dog, which is a noun, and the word ate. And your brain is probably already taking to that place for bone, because your brain is taking that prior knowledge and knowing that dogs eat bone. Now, think about this. We could also put the word bean. We could say the dog ate a bean. Bean fits the context of the sentence. It starts with the letter B, and it also has 4 letters. But that doesn't make quite as much sense as bone, because your brain is automatically taking that prior knowledge to tell you that dogs eat bones, not beans. Now, perhaps in the context of the sentence and the story, the dog did eat a bean, and maybe the bean fell to the floor and the dog ate it. But in the context of our prior knowledge, we automatically fill in the word bone. There are several activities that you can complete within the classroom to help teach syntax to your students. The first one is open-ended sentence starters. Open-ended sentence starters involve putting part of a sentence on the board. For example, on the screen you'll see, the girl went. Allow students to fill in the remaining part of the sentence. So a student could say, the girl went to the mall with her friends after school. Another student might say, the girl went to the zoo to see the tigers. If we take the phrase, early Saturday morning, I got up and cleaned my room and then did the dishes. Early Saturday morning, I met my friend at the pool for a quick swim. Students can fill those sentences in individually. You can also put word order cards, or put words on index cards and have students manipulate and put those in order. This would be a great time to put adjectives and adverbs on cards and have students manipulate those to see how the order of adjectives does make a difference, and how we change the adverb affects where it's placed in the sentence. For example, quick and quickly would be put in different places around the verb. You can also do sentence elaboration. Start with the basic sentence such as, the bird flew. Have students change bird to another bird. For example, a student might choose eagle. The eagle flew. Now change flew. The eagle soared. Have students elaborate. The bird, we could say, the majestic bald eagle soared gracefully through the sky. Notice how students would take a simple sentence and make it much more complex and add a great deal of syntax to that sentence to increase its understanding. When we say the bird flew, students may have very different images in their mind. But in the example that I provided, students have a very clear understanding of the message I'm trying to convey about the eagle. Also, teaching idioms, similes, and metaphors is extremely important. We can't assume that students necessarily know what an idiom means. If I say, "Do you have two left feet?" for example, students may think, "No, I have a left and a right." But we use that phrase to refer to when someone has stumbled or taken a little fall or tripped on something. We say, "Do you have two left feet?" So we need to specifically teach these items to students. We also need to explicitly teach grammar. It is imperative that students learn the rules of grammar and how those affect their messages that they're conveying. Think about if we don't teach commas to students and students don't know how to place commas between items in a series, for example. Very hard to understand what that student is writing. And a note on our younger learners. When we look at teaching syntax to our earliest learners, songs and nursery rhymes are extremely important. They help children improve their syntax. Repetition is essential to language learning, and singing helps make learning correct word order automatic. So don't forget the importance of nursery rhymes and songs when teaching syntax to your students. We've gone through quite a bit of information with syntax, so I'd like you to pause the video and take a moment to think about syntax. What was new learning? What was confirmed for you that you already knew? And how will it look to apply principles of syntax to your classroom? Are you seeing a higher level of importance on teaching grammar, for example? So take a moment to pause the video. If you are watching this with a colleague or colleagues, take a moment to share that new learning. If you're watching individually, take some time to pause and think individually about how these will apply to your classroom and be ready to share those ideas at a later date. Let's take a moment to explore the last element of structured literacy, which is semantics. Semantics is concerned with the meaning of words. Semantics helps us to convey clear messages, decipher and interpret messages, and makes our speech interesting, fluent, and setting appropriate. And it's imperative that students receive instruction in the meaning of written language, comprehension, and vocabulary. This instruction is what helps students to understand the use and meaning of a word within a given context. When we look at word meaning, we can look at two different types of word meanings. We can look at the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. The denotative meaning is the first meaning that will pop into our mind when we see a word in isolation. It might also be that dictionary definition of a word. So for example, if I say the word dog, you get a very specific mental image of a dog. And what we all see when I say the word dog is very different. Perhaps you're picturing the dog that you have at your house, or you're picturing a dog that you've seen at the Humane Society or at a pet store. The next level of a word meaning is something called the connotative meaning. And the connotative meaning varies according to age, culture, or individual experience. It conveys feeling and emotion related to the word. And it's important to note that every person and culture may have a different understanding and experience with the surrounding world. And this variation is why semantics is important. So for example, if I take the word skinny, skinny can have both a positive and a negative connotation. If we say, you're looking kind of skinny today, or have you lost weight, you're looking skinny, that could be positive or it could be negative depending on a person's experience with that word and maybe his or her goals with weight loss or not losing weight, etc. You can also look at vocabulary within the sentence, paragraph, and whole text level. And we know that how those words are used in isolation, within a sentence and a longer paragraph, can impact its meaning and understanding of how that word is being used. We can also look at stylistic meaning, and this reflects the social situation. So for example, the news on TV won't sound the same as when my best friend recaps what was announced in the news that was on television. The affective meaning conveys the individual feeling and attitude of the speaker. Politeness, irritation, sarcasm, tone and intonation help communicate affective meaning. So when we look at how these words are used within these varying levels, those are definitely elements that come into play with understanding how a word is being used. On the screen, you will see a triangle on the right-hand side that shows concept, referent, and symbol. Those are the three levels at which we can understand a word. The first is the concept. So when I say cat or dog, as I said earlier, what concept comes to mind when I say the word cat? Do I think of an animal with a tail, four legs, purrs, etc.? When I look at the referent is the picture. So I start to hone down into a specific cat. At first I'm thinking of a general cat, and then I'm referring to a specific cat. If you're a cat owner, you're picturing the cat that you own. I've not been a cat owner, but I'm imagining a cat that one of my best friends had growing up. Then we can look at the word on the word level. And on the right-hand side of that screen, you'll see kitty, gato, cat. You'll see different languages that we will see for the word cat. The word cat in English is C-A-T. In Spanish, it's G-A-T-O. So different languages represent a word differently. So it's that individual spelling and that individual meaning that's associated to those letters within the words. So when we look at semantics, we think about what is the concept, what is the reference, and what is the symbol or word. And we know that the word varies according to person and varies according to language. We can also think of this as how semantics, orthography, and phonology all come into play. The orthography is that image that we get of the word, and the phonology is what we hear when we say that word, cat or gato, for example. So think about the word house. What is the concept of the word house? What is the referent? And what is the symbol when we're writing that word house? So also think about this with the word friend. What is the concept of a friend? A person who we enjoy spending time with, a person who supports us. The referent, perhaps you're picturing a very specific friend, your best friend perhaps. And then the symbol, how do we write that word friend? So let's take a moment to next explore how we can build semantics for our students. So we can include semantic activities such as graphic organizers. Graphic organizers visually display the connection between words, phrases, and concept. And these increase vocabulary and improve reading comprehension and the understanding that students have of a word and how it's used. So when we think of Venn diagrams, comparing and contrasting words, comparing and contrasting concepts, friendship versus enemy, or friend versus enemy, for example. Story maps. Are we going to map that story? Is it a problem solution story? Is it a cause effect? Is it a traditional story map with characters and a plot? Compare and contrast. We can compare and contrast stories and genres. Compare and contrast how words are being used in various texts. Sequencing and problem solution are also graphic organizers that we can use. And when I think of this, I also think about teaching semantics through semantic gradients. For example, if I take the word happy, joyous, ecstatic, excited, How would you rank those words for students? How would students rank those words? Would they start at happy? And happy is a more general term, whereas ecstatic means that you are so excited you don't know what to do. And how would these variations and shades of meaning impact how you use words in speaking and writing? So would you say, I was happy to win $1,000, or I was ecstatic to win $1,000? Notice how that semantic change of the word impacts the meaning in those two sentences of winning $1,000. So it's important that we give students opportunity to explore language, shades of meaning, and how those impact understanding. Another excellent activity is a word map or a Frayer model. You'll see a link to a bit.ly, and you can click on that bit.ly, and we are going to work through what this might look like for the word friendship. In a Frayer model, there are 4 elements. There's definition, characteristics, examples, and non-examples. The link on the bit.ly will take you to this Frayer model. The middle has been left blank for you so that you can adapt this with any word or words you choose. When completing a Frayer model, you put your word in the center. We talked about the word friendship. It's always nice to start with the characteristics. What are the characteristics of that word you're working with? What are the characteristics of friendship? Loyalty, trustworthy, for example. And then list examples of what friendship would look like. Doing activities together, listening to your friend when he or she has an issue or a concern. What are non-examples of friendship? Talking behind someone's back, for example. And then going to the definition, writing the definition of what friendship means. So this is a very valuable activity to complete with words that you want your students to have a strong grasp with. They also work really well with conceptual words, as we talked about, friendship, companionship, democracy, those types of words. So try this activity with your students. After completing the Frayer model for friendship, what did yours look like? Do you have a better understanding of the word? Would your students? Do you see how this Frayer model activity could help your students understand the intricacies within a word and all of the knowledge that the student would bring to the word or words that you are using? If you completed this activity with a colleague or colleagues, compare your maps. Did yours look the same or different? How would your students' look the same or different if you were to complete this activity with them? So let's take a moment to pause the video and think about semantics. What was new learning for you? What confirmed what you already know? And how would it look to apply principles of semantics to your classroom? What instruction would you add or change to make sure that your students are understanding the semantics of a word or words? You may pause the video, and when you are ready, you may start the video and proceed to the next slide. In this session, we explored morphology, syntax, and semantics at a deeper level. After learning about the last 3 components of structured literacy, what are your thoughts? What was new learning for you? What resonates with you? What components do you want to learn more about? How will it look to apply the principles of morphology, syntax, and semantics to your classroom? So take a moment to pause and reflect on those questions. If you're watching with a colleague or colleagues, take some time to share your thoughts with one another. When you are ready, you may start the video and proceed to the next slide. As we finish this look into structured literacy, let's review our learning intentions and success criteria. Were you able to better understand morphology, syntax, and semantics? Were you successful? Can you list and define the last 3 components of structured literacy? Can you determine how to implement elements of morphology, syntax, and semantics with your students? Congratulations, you have now watched the 6th and final session. It's time for you to take the post-test. The post-test is embedded in the Google form for this presentation. I want to thank you for watching this sixth and final session. It has been my pleasure to walk you through the elements of structured literacy.